What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're discussing what changes could be made ahead of the 2022-23 season. Before last season was already over, I put out a tweet around game week 36 or 37 asking what you thought should be changed or what you'd want to see changed. And I've put that list together, and I'm going to give you my opinion on whether I think they're good ideas or bad ideas and kind of the reasons why as well. Just before we jump into it, right, I will say overall, I don't think FPL really needs too many changes. There's a reason it's one of the most, or if not the most popular football-based fantasy game, right? In the UK, it's definitely the biggest. There's over 9 million accounts last year. I know that doesn't necessarily mean they're all active, but the number just keeps on increasing. So as long as the percentage of active accounts doesn't change, then there is always more and more active managers. So it's very simple, it's very accessible, and obviously FPL themselves, it's a marketing tool for the Premier League. It gets people watching the Premier League. That's the whole reason for the game. They probably don't want to make too many changes, which makes the game complicated. So we have to kind of bear that in mind. And obviously some of us that create content, consume content, we're probably a little bit more engaged than other managers that just make their moves once a week on a Friday night, don't really worry about it too much till the next Friday. So we've got to take all that into account. But yeah, as a general rule, I don't think it needs too many changes, but there are some interesting things that they could do. So let's jump into it and talk about it. Okay, so for everything you've sent me, I've put it into different categories. So we'll just start off with general changes. One that came in a lot was changing the deadline to the first kickoff of the week. So if in game week 1 for next season, the first kickoff is 8 o'clock on Friday night, the deadline would also be 8 o'clock on Friday night. And pretty much every other fantasy game does this. Not literally everyone, but most other ones do this, right? And the thing is, you then all get the early team news. So if the kickoff's at 8, obviously the teams release it on Twitter, the lineup's at 7, you've got an hour then to make your changes. You're not trying to root around finding out who on Twitter has early team news, whether or not they're legit and stuff like that. It'd be a little bit less stressful. And I kind of am more of the opinion these days that I would like to see FPL do that. From a selfish point of view, it wouldn't necessarily be great for people that want to do deadline streams and stuff, because obviously then you'd have to stream even later on a Saturday than we already do. But that's a purely selfish thing. For the game, I think it makes more sense that you can just go to the club's Twitter account and just get the lineups. Whereas right now, you've got to try and hope that someone's got a bit of early team news. And I fully agree with people that say it's not fair when like a content creator or something like that gets a bit of early news. And I sometimes get that, and I try and share it as soon as I can. And obviously you're not going to ignore it when you get it, right? If you've got some information, you're going to use it. But I can see why people think it's not fair. This would kind of stop that. The only thing is a little bit of a hard balance for FPL to strike, because as soon as you do that, it means that anyone that's not on like a UK or near enough a UK time zone feels the need to have to get up super early, possibly if you're in like America or Australia or somewhere like that, to get that news as well. Whereas right now, because a lot of the time we don't get early news, you can just make your changes and just live with it. But I think at some point someone is always going to miss out on the deadline, or not always going to be able to be up. So I think just to kind of almost even the playing field a little bit, I probably do prefer them to put the deadline as the first kickoff. But I appreciate, in terms of being on an even playing field, it's not necessarily great for people that have to get up. But at least if you get up, you know where to go, the team account, instead of trying to root around on Twitter for who may or may not have early team news. So I think that would be a good change. The next two are kind of similar, right? So ability to change captain or substitute players. So a lot of games like the Euro game, for example, the World Cup game, I'm sure will do this year as well. If, say, in FPL you had a player playing on Saturday and they only got 2 points, or your captain only got 2 points, you'd then be able to switch the captain's armband to someone that was playing on Sunday. So this would improve the game from a strategy point of view, because you would have to make sure, not have to, but it would be good strategy usually to have a good captain playing on the Sunday as well, in case your one on the Saturday fails. Ultimately, though, I don't want to see FPL put this in at all. I think, again, the simplicity, the accessibility is a huge part of this game, and that's nice over a short period of time. Like, you know, the World Cup might be on for like 4 or 5 weeks, but for a game that goes on for 38 game weeks, as soon as you start missing some captaincy switches, or you don't substitute a player because you were out or whatever, then you're suddenly going to fall behind. It's going to be harder and harder to kind of creep back up in rank. Whereas if you just got to do it once a week, I much prefer that. So it's really fun. I completely agree. It is a fun like format for fantasy, but it's fun for a few weeks. It's not fun, in my opinion. I don't think it would be anyway for 38 weeks. Some people want to see the number of capped transfers changed. You can bank one transfer so you can have 2 next week. Some people want to see it completely uncapped, so you could potentially save 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 transfers if you were happy with your team. Some people just want like an extra one to get it to 3. I do think I wouldn't want to see it uncapped, and the reason is if you get lucky and you pick players who don't get injured or happen to go on this really good run and then everyone else is playing catch up, your team's doing really well, which I know the idea is to pick a team that does well. But like I say, if at the start of the season you just get really lucky with injuries or something like that, you're getting to save transfers when other people are having to make them. So I think by having a cap of 2, it kind of just narrows down the ability for someone to push further ahead. Like I've talked about this with kind of team value and stuff like that. If you happen... Well, we can all pick good players at the start of the season, but if you happen to get the ones that go on a bit of a scoring run for the first 3 or 4 weeks, you'll make a lot of team value, and then you're already ahead in the amount of transfers you have to use. You're already ahead in team value. I don't necessarily think I'd like to see uncapped transfers. The only reason it would be good is it might pull people back to the game. Because right now, if you've not played for weeks, if you put the game down and you want to come back, you've only got 2 transfers, right? Whereas if it was uncapped, you could maybe come back 10 weeks later. Okay, you're going to be behind because you've not made changes, but you can at least overhaul your team and get your team looking like someone else that's playing at the time. So there are, again, like with a lot of these, there are good and bad points, but I just think having it completely uncapped gives an advantage to essentially those that get a little bit lucky with not getting an injury or something like that, not getting a suspension and not having to use those extra transfers. But moving it to like maybe 3 or 4 or something like that, I don't see a huge issue with doing that. I don't want to see them get rid of captaincy and vice captaincy. I know that sometimes it feels like a captaincy basically wins someone the game. And, you know, it can mean the difference of kind of like 15, 20 points just based off 2 players, you know, if you get the wrong captaincy. But I think it's exciting. I like it. I do like it. I know some people think it gives a huge amount more luck. I don't think so. I think there's still skill in picking who should be your captain. Yes, sometimes you'll get times like Salah being captain every single week, but that's not always going to happen. And it didn't happen towards the end of last season either. So I don't really want to see captaincy go. I quite like that. Should we change players like Salah to forwards? I mean, sure. I don't necessarily think this is one of those things that's going to make the game better. I think people want to see them as forwards because they are forwards, and that's fine, right? Salah, Son, maybe even Jota as well, players like that. You could definitely put them in the forward category. But the way FPL is set up, you only get to choose 3. So it would make those decisions harder. Does that make it more fun? Is it more fun not being able to get all the great players from the Premier League in your team at once? I don't necessarily think it does. And if you think about the players that will be moved to forwards, like the ones I've mentioned, it then, I guess, leaves the midfielder pool a little bit weaker. So you're having to pick players that maybe aren't quite as good. Again, maybe that will make the game better in that you'll have to pick players that we don't usually pick, and that makes it a little bit more difficult maybe. But ultimately, I think they probably should or will do this season, but I don't necessarily think it makes the game more fun or that much more different, really. It just makes it harder to have the players that you like in your team. So, yeah, maybe that'll add some skill, but I don't think it's going to be this great big change and the great thing for this game that everyone thinks that it will be. One thing you could do to combat that is the next point, is have a float-in position. So have 4 defenders, 4 midfielders and 2 forwards, and then you get to pick where your next position is. You can have a 3rd forward, a 6th midfielder or whatever, have up to 6 defenders, whatever it might be. You could have like a floating position, or you could have the ability to select players playing in a different position. So for example, Salah could be a midfielder or a forward. So if you select him in the forward position, he would score like a forward. Or you could select him as a midfielder and he would score like a midfielder instead. And obviously you'd have to then decide, is Salah as a midfielder and then picking a different forward better than having Salah as a forward and picking a different midfielder? So it would take away that element where maybe they put too many players as forwards and there's not enough decent midfielders to pick from. It might kind of combat that a little bit. But again, that just comes down to one of those things. Will that make it a little bit too complicated for people that maybe aren't as engaged as, those of you that are watching this video and stuff like that? So I like it. I have seen that in a draft game before. I can't remember what it was called now, but players like Sterling and Salah, you could have them as forwards or have them as midfielders. Maybe that's the way to combat it. But I think suddenly lumping loads of midfielders into forwards where there's only 3 spots, I don't necessarily know or think that is great for the game. But I guess the only way to find out is wait till next season. If they do it, see what happens. All right, let's go through some of the scoring changes, and I think most of these are actually pretty good. So I believe it's Gaffer, another fantasy game that does half clean sheet points. There's a few ways you could do this, but right now you get 4 points as soon as you hit 60 minutes, and obviously then you keep that as long as you don't concede either before you go off or up until the 90th minute, right, when the game ends. With half clean sheet points, you get 2 of those points for 45 minutes, and then the second lot of 2 points, right, to make up the 4, of course, would be for the next half, so getting it for the full 45 minutes, or you could just do it half an hour. So you could do 2 points for 45 minutes and then another 2 points when you get up to kind of 75 minutes, so 30 minutes into the second half. And I think with 5 substitutes coming in next year, that could be quite a good move, because it is very frustrating when a player comes off at like the 59th minute and then someone else stays on till like the 61st minute or the 63rd or whatever. They get brought off and they get so many extra points. I know it doesn't happen a huge amount, but I think with 5 substitutes it could happen more, and I don't really see a big reason not to do that. Again, do I think it really massively needs to come in? No. But do I think it's bad either? Definitely not. So I quite like that one. Hits costing less is good. I think 2 points is probably too little, but I think 3 points instead of 4 could tempt more people to take hits, and I think that could be a good thing, right? There is skill in using hits. I think this season in particular, those that were open to hits, especially around blanks and double game weeks and stuff like that, probably did quite well. So I think reducing them to 3 points to encourage people to make more transfers outside of kind of double game weeks could be good. I think you probably need someone cleverer than me to go and do the maths of like whether 2 points is too little or not. But I think reducing it down from 4 would encourage people to make more transfers. And ultimately that would be interesting, right? I think we get bored when our teams are the same, and 4 points is just such a huge cost to make a transfer. We're always kind of put off doing that. If you reduce it a little bit more, people would be more tempted to do it. It'd probably just be a little bit more interesting to get to change the players a lot. And there would be a bit of... There is skill in deciding when to take a hit, right? Whether that points hit is worth it for kind of the short or the long term. And I think reducing that down a little bit would make the game a little bit more interesting in terms of taking them. So I do think that's another good point that people suggested. I just think 2 might be a little bit too... few points, whereas 3 might be a nicer balance. Points for winning a penalty, yeah, I don't see why we don't have this. They have it in other games. I think for winning a penalty, you should probably just get less than 3. And so whether the penalty is scored, you just get the point for winning the penalty, but you get less than 3. So it could be 1, it could be 2. And even the person that takes the penalty can still get the assist. So if Ronaldo goes down for Man United, he gets 2 points because he's won the penalty no matter what. And if he scores it, obviously he gets the goal as well. If Bruno Fernandes gets fouled, he gets 2 points whether Ronaldo scores it or not. Yeah, I think that's decent, but I think you probably should, if you're going to do that, reduce the number of points down from what a real assist is worth. Okay, this is a big one. Make defensive midfielders a real option, right? So you could do that with recoveries, tackles, interceptions. You could overhaul the bonus system so that defensive midfielders are better. I don't care about this, right? Again, it's one of those things that people always want in the game. They want more players as options. But all that happens is, if there's a central defensive midfielder that is great, that you know is going to return loads of points, everyone will just get them anyway. Just like everyone gets Salah now, everyone gets Son, right? If that one player, like if it's Rodri or whoever for Man City, Fabinho for Liverpool, whoever it is, if they're suddenly a great option for their price, everyone will just stick them in the team and just leave them. So I don't think it makes it more interesting. So, for example, there's Sky Fantasy Football, and in that they have a different way of scoring points. So in FPL, Trent is seen as the best defender, right? Very rarely rotated, plays for a team that gets a lot of clean sheets and is very attacking. When I started playing Sky, do you know what people said to me? Don't get Trent, get Van Dijk instead, because he outscores him. So as soon as people realise that, well, this player is going to do really well because he's going to hit these kind of points, and that could be for defenders or central defensive midfielders, people will just get them anyway. And when I'm watching a game, the thing I love about FPL is I'm worried about 3 things: clean sheets, assists, and goals. I don't want to be sitting there thinking, oh, if he makes another 2 interceptions, that's an extra point. So again, I'm quite indifferent about this stuff. I'm not against central defensive midfielders being options. I do not think it makes the game more fun or more exciting in any way. It just opens up the pool to a bunch of players that, when I'm watching them, I don't really care about, right? Not from an FPL point of view anyway. Maybe I would if they were going to get me some points, but ultimately I don't think it makes it that much more interesting, to be honest with you. Bonus system in general I think is actually okay. I know people tend to moan about it. As soon as a player they think should get bonus doesn't, they moan. When a player that doesn't get a clean sheet or an assist but gets bonus points, they moan. in general, I think it's fine. It doesn't happen that often, but you could make it a system where if you hit a certain amount of bonus points, you get a certain amount of bonus. So, for example, in some games, if it's a high-scoring game, then you're only the top 3 get points. But someone like Kevin De Bruyne, for example, might not get any assists or goals, have really high BPS, but because some other players have scored and assisted, they'll be ahead. And then in another match, it could be a really drab affair, hardly any goals, just really bad game. But because they have to give 3 players bonus from that game, another player might get it, whereas someone like Kevin De Bruyne doesn't. So I think hitting a certain bonus or BPS in a game should or could then award you a certain amount of points. It would have to be capped, right? You don't want people getting like 6, 7, 8 bonus. But I quite like that idea. You could also not basically double reward action. So right now, you score a goal, you get X amount of points, 4 points for a forward, 5 for a midfielder. You then get a bunch of extra bonus as well. So they could just do away with that and then just do it for creating chances. It could then be for interceptions, tackles and stuff like that. And maybe that's how you get certain midfielders into the game. And obviously you want to remove how some of the negative bonus works as well. So if you miss a big chance and stuff like that, you get bonus points taken off you. I don't know if kind of shooting or trying to score goals should really be seen as a negative thing. I guess if it was a player that was constantly spamming goal or trying to spam shots from anywhere at any point in the game, like all the time, like Andros Townsend always comes into my mind, just constantly shooting over the bar, then maybe that's not such a great thing. But overall, I think, it probably should just be removed at this point. Okay, so chip changes. I'm going to come on to the last point first, which is to remove chips completely. I don't want this to happen, and I'm telling you now, the FPL community, the majority of them also do not want this to happen. This always seems to come up in conversation, and it always sounds from when people talk about it that everybody wants them removed. But anytime I've done a poll on YouTube or Twitter, people want them there, right? So people do like them, and they must be working for FPL, which is why they're keeping them in. So I don't think they're going to remove them, and I don't want them to be removed either. I actually think they do add a little bit of a fun element, like just an extra thing to talk about, an extra thing to plan during the season, right? You get some of those big scores as well. I quite like it. Chips in both half of the season has to happen. I can't even tell you how long we've been talking about this. When I used to be on the Scoutcast, and I can't even tell you when the last time I went on there on Fantasy Football Scout was, we used to talk about this, right? So right now you have a wild card in the first half, you have a wild card in the second half, but free hit, triple captain, bench boost, and whatever chips they add or change, they're just once per season. So everyone just saves them for the double game weeks, right? Now, I know I've used my bench boost the last few seasons in a single game week. Some people use their triple captain in a single game week. But I can tell you right now, next season, if everything stays the same way with the chips, you are better off holding them for doubles and blank game weeks later on in the season, because it'll be the easiest way to manage and the easiest way to kind of maximise your points potential. Giving us them in the first half of the season as well just adds a little bit of something different, right? Getting to use a free hit during a single game week. There's no planning for doubles and stuff involved. Getting to triple captain someone in a single game week and not feeling like you have to save it for a double. And I know people will turn around and say you don't have to, but you'd be almost crazy not to in most situations. So I think they need to do that, and I don't see why they haven't already done that at all, to be honest, because again, it just adds with the engagement that they want from FPL managers. Change the free hit chip to limitless. So for anyone that played the Euros game last time around, they had a limitless chip, which is essentially the same as the free hit chip in FPL. So you can just use it 1 week and change your whole team, but there's unlimited budget. So you could use it in like a double game week in FPL and get Salah and as long as they haven't left the club, of course, Salah and Mane, De Bruyne, Son, Kane, etc., Cristiano Ronaldo, all in your team at one time. Again, I think that's a pretty fun change. I don't see a huge amount wrong with that. If you're going to keep the free hit chip, give us it as a limitless chip instead. You can call it something different if you don't want to copy the Euros, but do that. And some people want chips to be updated or changed every season. I think you've got to be careful. I think if a chip is good, you should keep it. I think you can make small updates or maybe add the odd chip and remove one and then change it back in a few seasons. But I think people like knowing kind of what's coming and how to use stuff. So once you've learned how something works, you can then maybe put what you've learned from that season into the next season. So I don't necessarily think they need to do this, but chips in for both halves of the season and free hits are limitless. I like that. Okay, so this is price changing or just pricing in general. So I really think they need to put in dynamic starting prices. So right now, everything's 0.5 or got a 0 on the end, right? So we all know everyone's going to be 4.5 or 5 or 5.5 or 6, etc., etc. But not every player fits into that bracket. And here's a really good example for next year, Mitrovic. People are already talking about what price he should be. General kind of price for a promoted striker like that for Fulham, especially one that hasn't necessarily come in and scored loads of goals in the Premier League before, would be 6.5 million. Some people are saying he scored so many goals last year, he should be priced at 7, right? So rather than just have it at 6.5 or 7, where maybe you're thinking, okay, 6.5 is too little, 7 million is too much, just price him at 6.7 or 6.8. Player prices change throughout the season. They do not have at all times 0.5 or a 0 at the end. Player prices go up. Saka's 6.5 starting price, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8 as the season goes on, etc. Right? That's just an example. Why not just do it at the start? Maybe it just doesn't look as good on the FPL page. Maybe not having that rounded number to 99, 99.5 or 100 million spent just doesn't look as good. But the fact that these player prices change throughout the season means you should be able to do it at the start. And I think especially kind of forwards, for example, where you feel the need to have to put them up in price, but going up a whole 0.5 million or even a million is too much. Put them up like 0.6 or 0.7 or something like that. Same with defenders. I think Trippier was a really good example last year. For a Newcastle defender at the time, I know they improved, but at the time, 5 million felt like too much. 4.5 was too little. 4.7, 4.8. Just price him at that from the start. What is the issue with doing that? I also think for some players, they should be open to changing the price throughout the summer. Like if a player moves to a different club and suddenly becomes then just too obvious to get, they could change the price. I wouldn't want to see him do it with too many players though, and I think once people create their teams, it could create problems if they later on then make their team over budget, right? They'd have to like alert them somehow. So I do see issues with it, but I don't know, someone like Simicast, for example, 4 million. I mean, those budget gems are really nice, but realistically, FPL should have probably just changed the price of him so it was more in line with what he was worth at Liverpool. I'm not so bothered about this one because I do think it's quite nice to sometimes get those budget enablers and stuff like that, but I can see why people might want that to happen. Transparent price changes, yeah, it could be a good thing. I think the way we have it now, it's all about guesswork, and it can be frustrating when everyone kind of makes their changes early and you get kind of priced out because you want to wait for information. But there is obviously like a risk and reward factor with that. If you want to get the team value, you go early and you sometimes get screwed over by press conference news, or you wait for the info so you got everything at hand and then you skip out on, you know, the price increase and the team value increase. So I mean they could put this in. I'm not really bothered about it either way, to be honest. And some people want for every 0.1 a player goes up to get 0.1 to spend. The reason that right now it has to go up 0.2 is, again, to stop people getting too far ahead. It comes back to that almost luck thing. You know, if we uncap transfers and you suddenly have to make no moves, you might be in a luckier position than someone else. If you happen to get all the right players at the start of the season, they all start going up 0.1, your team value is going to be too far ahead. So I don't think they should do this. But dynamic pricing, get it done. Okay, so I do think FPL, most popular kind of football game in the UK, I don't see why they're not really trying to add in more games to keep people more engaged with the Premier League and stuff like that. They could even make them kind of short-term competitions. You could do like a 5-game week game or like 10-game week game, whatever it might be, and then add different rules, possibly do different rules for different games throughout the season. And some people are really against this, as if they have to play these extra games. They'd literally be there as a choice. So, for example, you can have a game week 1 to game week 5 competition where you can't pick any players over 10 million. It'd be completely separate to the normal game. It would just be within the overall kind of UI of the FPL page where you could select it. No players from the top 6, a free hit every single week. These are the kind of things they could add in that I think could be fun. It's more content for them to create. It's more content for content creators to create. It's more games for people to play, and you're keeping them on your website. I think it's a pretty cool idea, to be honest. They definitely need to overhaul the Cup. I've said this for a long time. The Cup is boring. There's nothing to talk about with it. Like, people ask me how I'm doing in the Cup. I don't know. I don't really care. Of course, if I got down to the latter stages of the competition, it would be nice. But at no point am I ever making a change based on my Cup opponent. I'm not engaged with that part of FPL at all. I just don't care. It just doesn't matter to me whatsoever. But if you overhauled it, so again, it was separate to your normal team, that could be more interesting. So you have a second team just for the cup. And that the thing I've talked about a lot is to have that free hit every single week. So let's say the cup starts in game week 19. Okay, well, I'm going to build a team for game week 19. And if I get through, great. I get to make a new fresh team for game week 20. It's something a little bit different, and I'm actually going to think about it. Now, I get put against Johnny from halfway around the world. I can see his team. I think, okay, well, I've got a rank to worry about. I've got mini leagues to worry about. I'm just going to make transfers based on my own team. I'm not going to try and combat his team. I'm not going to try and put in a similar player so that I don't lose out. I just don't care. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. And I do think the cup is just in the game for no real reason, right? It just doesn't really add much for me anyway. Let me know below if you think different. And some people want customizable mini league rules. Sure, why not? And these are just some UI changes that could be good. So the ability to see how your team looks for future weeks, that has to be in there, right? The fact that we can see our team for game week 2, but we can't see what it's going to look like for game week 3. I just don't see why that's not in there. Obviously, there's lots of great tools that are doing that. I use FPL Team a lot. Obviously, there's Live FPL as well. And it's great that people have made those websites that allow us to plan our changes and stuff like that. But it'd be nice to be able to see it on the FPL page as well. Live rank during games, again, there's other websites that do that. So I don't see why FPL cannot put that into the UI as well. They could introduce a Hall of Fame. A lot of other websites do this already, like Fantasy Football Scout has its own Hall of Fame. But in terms, or in order to be in that, you have to be in the Fantasy Football Scout League so that they can pull the information. It would be pretty cool if they could just, if FPL could just do it, right? Introduce a way to kind of give people points based on previous ranks and stuff like that, and just have a separate section. I know it would be a little bit harsh for people that haven't played the game as serious for as long and stuff like that, but overall I think it would be pretty cool. As would having achievements. Now, they would have to put this in a way where it doesn't alter the way you play. So, you know, they can't have an achievement that says take 5 hits in a game week, right? Because that just wouldn't be great. You'd feel like you'd be forced to do it just to complete a badge. But gamifying games like this is what a lot of places do, right? You see them in games all the time. You play the game, you have to do certain things to get certain badges unlocked or stuff like that, and they could then be on your profile. So when someone clicks into your team, they can see which achievements you've got. It could just be playing the game for a certain amount of times. It could be hitting kind of 20 points with your captain, hitting 25 points with a defender. And yes, you wouldn't be able to do them every season, but hopefully they then roll over. So if in a latter season it happens, remember like when John Stones got 27 points, happy days, you'd unlock that. So that's just a cool thing they could add. Does it make the game better? Not necessarily, but I think it is a nice thing to see on people's profiles and stuff like that. And they probably need to add modern stats where form and ICT go. So like, for example, if you click on a player, it shows their influence, creativity and threat. But I mean, what does that mean, right? And how are people using that? Like, you know, expected goals, expected assists, that's what people are using these days. It's way more modern. I'm sure they've got access to those stats. Why not just have them on the FPL page in some way? Maybe just overhaul this section completely, so it's history, fixtures and stats, and so you can go through it, right? That's just something that just seems obvious to add. So loads of changes there. I know that was quite a long video. Let me know what you think about everything I've discussed. Is there anything you really want to see in, really don't want to see in? Anything that I've said would be a good idea that you hate? I know the deadline on the kickoff will be quite divisive, for example, but let me know below what you think. If you enjoyed that video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button. Next video, it will be some price predictions for 22-23. Then we'll have the fixtures coming out in the middle of June. Then hopefully we won't be too far away from FPL launching for next season. I'll catch you again soon.